Have you ever noticed that so many of the stories you love, from Star Wars to Harry Potter to The Lion King, kind of feel the same deep down? It's almost like they're all built on the same ancient blueprint. Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. The secret architecture of myth that underpins pretty much all of literature. Okay, let's get into it.
To see what I mean, let's just take two wildly different stories. You've got the Epic of Gilgamesh, about this legendary king who's terrified of death, so he goes off to battle gods and monsters to try and live forever. And then you have James Joyce's Ulysses, which follows a totally ordinary guy, Leopold Bloom, as he just wanders around Dublin for a single uneventful day. I mean, one is an epic hero wrestling with destiny, the other is a regular guy just trying to make it home for dinner. What in the world could they possibly have in common?
The answer, in a word, is myth. And we need to get one thing straight right off the bat. When we talk about myth, we are not talking about something that's false. Nope. In literature, myth is the absolute truth. You can think of it as the DNA of storytelling. It's the foundational code that shapes the themes, the characters, and the conflicts of pretty much every story ever told. It is the blueprint.
So, how did this narrative DNA, this grammar of story, even come to be? Well, to figure that out, we have to go way back, to a time before writing, when stories were things you experienced, not words you just read on a page.
I mean, just imagine it. You're sitting around a crackling fire, and a bard starts chanting this epic tale of heroes and monsters. The first epics, like Gilgamesh, they were live shows. They were these fluid, dynamic events that a storyteller would shape and reshape for that specific audience, on that specific night. These weren't just entertainment. They were the living, breathing memory of an entire culture.
But here's the thing about spoken stories. They're fleeting, right? They only exist in memory. So what happens when a new technology comes along that can fix them in time? The invention of writing didn't just record stories, it fundamentally rewired how our brains even process them.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the massive cognitive shift this all represents. Oral stories, on the left, used what scholars call parataxis. Think of it like a string of beads. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It's simple, it's additive, and it's really easy to remember. Writing, on the other hand, allowed for subordination. This is much more like a complex web, with main plots and subplots and ideas that all depend on each other. And all of a sudden, stories could hold way more complexity, way more psychological depth, and a real sense of history.
Now, you might think that pinning a story down on a page would lock it into one final form. But actually, a lot of the time, the exact opposite happened. A written text became this kind of cultural anchor, a solid foundation that future generations could then build on and reinterpret. And there's no better example of this than the epic poem, the Ramayana.
Just look at the journey this one story takes. The original Sanskrit version by Valmiki establishes the hero, Rama, as the ideal man. But as the story traveled, it just transformed. The Tamil version infused it with these lush South Indian aesthetics. The popular Hindi version made Rama a more accessible, personal god. And then, and this is my favorite, you get to the Bengali version, which completely flips the script and turns the demon king, Ravana, into a tragic hero. It just proves that a core myth isn't a cage, it's a launch pad.
So, this incredible adaptability, the fact that one story can wear so many different faces across so many cultures, it led 20th century thinkers to ask a really profound question. If the details change so much, is there some unchangeable pattern hidden underneath it all? They set out to decode the ancient blueprint of all stories.
They developed a field called archetypal criticism, which draws on the psychologist Carl Jung's idea of a collective unconscious. The theory, basically, is that all humans share a kind of psychic inheritance, a set of these primordial images or archetypes that just show up again and again in our stories. Think of the archetype of the wise old mentor. From Merlin to Obi-Wan Kenobi to Dumbledore, it's the same pattern, and it resonates across centuries because it's baked right into our collective imagination.
The critic Northrop Frye came up with this really fascinating system you see here. He argued that all of literature fits into the cycle of the 4 seasons. So let's break it down. Spring is comedy. And not ha-ha funny, but stories of rebirth, weddings, and new beginnings. Summer is romance, the high adventure of the hero on some idealized quest. Autumn is tragedy, the inevitable fall, the sacrifice of the hero, like in Hamlet. And winter is satire and irony, a dark, chaotic world where heroes are either absent or totally powerless. For Frye, storytelling itself follows this predictable, natural cycle.
And of course, there's Joseph Campbell's monomyth, which you probably know better as the hero's journey.
He saw this one universal pattern in heroic tales, which he broke down into these 3 core stages. It might sound a little academic, but I promise you know this story by heart. Just think of Luke Skywalker. He departs his ordinary farm life, he's initiated into the ways of the Force through trials and mentorship, and he returns as a Jedi to save the galaxy. It's the plot of The Matrix, The Lord of the Rings, and so many others. It's a blueprint for our blockbusters because, as Campbell argued, it's a blueprint for our own psychological growth.
Okay, so we have these powerful blueprints, but great artists are more like architects than assembly line workers. They don't just follow the plans, they reinvent them. In the 20th century, writers began to actively use and twist and even subvert these ancient patterns to make sense of their own world. After the trauma of World War I, many writers felt that traditional stories just couldn't capture the fragmented, chaotic feeling of modern life. So T.S. Eliot proposed what he called the mythic method. The idea was to use an ancient myth as a kind of scaffolding to give shape and significance to the present. For instance, in his poem The Wasteland, he used the myth of the Fisher King and the quest for the Holy Grail to structure his portrait of a broken post-war Europe.
And this slide brilliantly illustrates 2 different ways of using that method. Think of it like this. T.S. Eliot, on the left, was like a sculptor. He was taking the broken fragments of the modern world and using myth to piece them back into a coherent, ordered whole. James Joyce, on the right, he was more like a collage artist. By paralleling a single day in Dublin with Homer's epic Odyssey, he didn't try to contain the chaos of modern life, he celebrated it, investing all these mundane little details with universal significance.
And then there's J.R.R. Tolkien, who didn't just borrow myths, he built a new one completely from scratch. He called this act mythopoeia, or subcreation. I mean, he didn't just write a story, he built the world of Middle-earth from the ground up, complete with creation myths, genealogies of gods, fully formed languages, thousands of years of history, the whole shebang. For Tolkien, this was a profound imaginative act, an attempt to create a mythology for England where he felt one was missing.
For other writers, myth became a powerful tool of resistance. For centuries, colonial powers imposed their own stories on the cultures they conquered, often depicting them as primitive or as having no history. In the 20th century, post-colonial writers began to fight back by using their own indigenous myths to reclaim their narrative. And this drive is perfectly captured in this goal, to tell the African story from an internal perspective.
And you can see just how incredibly powerful this strategy was. Chinua Achebe structured his novel Things Fall Apart around Igbo beliefs to show the complex civilization that existed before the colonizers ever arrived. Bola Isawinka drew on the Yoruba god Ogun, a figure of both creation and destruction, as a symbol for revolution. And Salman Rushdie masterfully wove Hindu and Islamic traditions together to capture the kaleidoscopic reality of modern India. They were all using myth to write their own history.
This same strategy of rewriting the story has been absolutely vital for feminist authors seeking to challenge the deep patriarchal bias of Western classics. In The Penelopiad, Margaret Atwood brilliantly retells the Odyssey not from the hero's perspective, but from that of his wife, Penelope, and, as the quote highlights, the 12 maids who were brutally executed in the original tale. It's a profound act of giving voice to the silenced.
So, whether it's reclaiming a cultural history or rewriting a patriarchal one, it's clear myth is far more than just a literary device. This brings us to a bigger question. Why do these ancient stories still have such a powerful grip on us? It's because their function extends far beyond the page and into the very structure of our societies.
The anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski argued that a myth's primary job isn't to explain nature, but to justify a society's customs and institutions. He called it a social charter. Think of myths as a kind of social constitution. They are the foundational stories that legitimize a culture's laws, its power structures, and its moral values, explaining why things are the way they are.
And this slide breaks down exactly what that charter does. As you can see, myths validate the social order. They act as a warrant for our rituals, giving our ceremonies their meaning and power. They provide a moral code with examples of right and wrong. And maybe most importantly, they serve as our collective memory, preserving the values that define a culture's identity.
And this brings us full circle. Literature is the primary engine that drives this process. Ancient Rome's great epic, the Aeneid, was commissioned to create a foundational myth for the Roman Empire, justifying its destiny to rule the world. And in the exact same way, a modern post-colonial novel uses indigenous myth to dismantle colonial narratives and forge a new shared destiny. Both use stories to define who a people are and who they want to become.
So, if myths are the living charters that validate our societies and shape our futures, it leaves us with one final, provocative question.
What are the myths that we're living by today? And what kind of future are we creating with the stories we choose to tell?